everybody, and welcome to The Split, the young adult book review podcast for readers and writers. This is a very special episode of The Split with me, Brian Cohen, the author of Ted Saves the World, and that, Robert Scanlon, author of The Dreamer Chronicles. We're doing a year in review, even though it's only episode 51. 51 is a lot of weeks. A lot of books. 50 books. I felt like that was a good number too, 50 books. And I'm taking a month off next month. So we figured we'd get it out of the way now. Robert, it's been a good year. We've read a lot. We've read a lot of really interesting stuff.
It's been fantastic, actually. I think I've gained more than I realised that I was going to gain. I mean, I love reading and I love talking about stories. And obviously that's probably why we're both authors in the first place, is because there's something about that whole process of reading. It transports you somewhere else, whether it's an audiobook, whether it's a text version. You're transported, you're offered options and ideas in your mind that you may not be able to experience in your own everyday reality. So there's something there that kind of balances some of our everyday stresses. And you would think that the young adult audience wouldn't necessarily have those same needs. And perhaps they don't. Maybe they have slightly different needs, which is why sometimes we fail to see why a particular YA novel has taken off, because it's got something in there that super appeals to the 14-year-old. And I think what has really been great has been trying to understand how I, as an adult, relate to stories, how I, as a younger person, may have related to stories, and how I, as a writer, relate to these stories as well. So, it really has been a treasure chest.
Yeah, and I feel it's kind of a shame. Both of us, we started working on this, and then I've written one fiction book since. You, as far as I know, haven't written any. But now when we do sit down to write our next fiction book, I think that we're just going to have a lot more to work with, a lot more colors to paint with, a much better understanding of how to frame our book so that it does fulfill some of these aspects of young adult books that make them strong. I kind of want to go in reverse of your order you have here in the notes.
Sure.
Can we talk about what makes a young adult book good? First?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we'll go into our things we can learn. We'll go into our tops, then we go our bottom, which I'm going to call not our bottom.
No.
But books we can learn a lot from.
You're so diplomatic, Brian.
I'm so diplomatic. What is a young adult book? We'll alternate.
Yeah.
We'll alternate here. And if any of mine are the same as yours, because you have multiple points in your notes, I just have a little bit. Let's alternate. Do you want to go first or second?
Yeah. So we're talking about the sort of the premise. You mean the underlying idea what a young adult book could bring?
Yeah, and what makes it good? How do you take that underlying aspect and make it strong in the next book you're writing?
Yes. Well, I think, there are some really good writing books about this, but let's talk about it from a reader's perspective first, I suppose.
Okay.
One of the obvious things is these books are written about people who are growing up, and often aimed at people who are growing up. So we could say that the classic coming of age is probably one of the most fundamental premises of a young. It's not by no means does every young adult book have it. In fact, there are less than there are more. But the coming of age story. So, and it could be because there's coming of age in terms of superpowers. It could be because there's coming of age in terms of I know, like I Am Number 4. He's an alien, but he's growing up. He's got to find his way. He's falling in love. He doesn't know what to do. He's abandoned by, or his mentor dies. What does he do? And so this is a little bit like every 16-year-old who maybe realizes that their parents are not the gods that you once thought that they were, and who on earth are you? What are you going to become? I thought this was really well done, particularly well done, for example, say in Paper Towns, where he thought a certain way about is it Margot? And he had this sort of ideal picture of her in his mind, but the whole coming of age thing was that he grew through this sort of this pursuit to try and find Margot. So, I
Yeah.
like the idea that because of the premise, the character has to grow. And any number of them, the testing, the Paper Magician, there's been a number of books that have really had a significant coming of age aspect to them.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that I'm going to go right into my next point with that, which is that your person who is coming of age, your character needs to be compelling. They need to have a reason that we're looking at them. And usually in most parts, we need some snark. We need a little bite to our character.
Yes.
And when we don't have that, when we're lacking, you've got our characters, both of our characters in all the bright places.
Yes.
We've got in Steelheart, we've got snarky characters all around. Before I Fall, we've got our snarky lead who's popular now but didn't used to be, but that makes them compelling. So if we care about this person, even if they're a jerk, because in Before I Fall, she was a jerk to start.
Yes.
They don't need to be perfect. They just need to have a reason that we're looking at them. And if we have a character who we don't want to spend, it's a character you want to spend time with. If it's a character you don't want to spend time with, that you wish you weren't locked in a cell with, like in the beginning of Shatter Me, then that's going to be a problem. So you need that compelling, snarky main character.
Yes, and the interplay as well, I think, between them and a secondary protagonist makes for something really special. It's the foil for the sword. So you think of Puck and Sean in the Scorpio races, or Darrow and Mustang in Red Rising, and as you've already mentioned, Theodore and Violet in All the Bright Places. When you bring that in and plant it on top of the premise, whether the premise be coming of age, whether the premise be dystopia or apocalypse, or a simple love story, or a kind of fighting prowess or superpowers, all of that, you can have a great character. And if you have a secondary great character, to me, that's what makes it even. I personally like that.
Yeah. No, I think. I totally agree. I totally agree with you. So I'm looking at your notes in here too, because I just don't want this to be an hour long. No. It's true. But why don't you talk to me about dystopia and apocalypse? Because we've read a lot of dystopian and apocalypse books, and I think we can combine them together a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Why does this work so well in the young adult genre, you think?
I think it's because if you think about growing up and you've been again under the protective hands of mum and dad or whatever guardian, and so you believe what they say, they are your world, and then at some point, maybe as you get into the double digits, and maybe earlier rather than later for some, and some it's quite late, you figure out that there are actually aspects to the world that are a bit nasty. Maybe they're snarky people at school. Maybe your best friend turns on you. Maybe people grow up and they aren't what you expected. Maybe you figure out that your mum and dad aren't the wise people that you always thought they were. So I think metaphorically, the apocalypse or the dystopia is a metaphor for the transition from being young to being in a world that isn't necessarily as simple as it was when you were a kid and you just go out in the yard and make up your own play. And so I think one of the reasons why it's appealing is that you're suddenly pitted against something. And as a kid, when you might be 18 and going out to work for the first time, and all of a sudden you're pitted against stuff that you've never had to learn at school. Which was always one of my beefs with school, actually, was that you didn't really learn pragmatic day-to-day, even, it's silly, but you call it survival skills. So if you look at a dystopia or an apocalypse, they're all about the survival skills. And what do I do? So the apocalypse is, right, it's happened, and now I've got to deal with the consequences and the fallout, literally sometimes. And a dystopia might be post-apocalypse, where things are settled, or it could be that evil government has grown to be oppressive, evil, nasty, violent dictatorship. And we have that in the news all around us. And maybe you don't take much notice of that when you're a kid, but as you start to grow older, my daughter, will be turning 13 in a few months, so she's coming into teendom. Already she'll ask me questions about the news. Why did this happen, and so why are they doing that? And they've recently been to our capital, Canberra, and had a trip down there to go to the Senate, to go to Parliament House, and you sort of wonder, how do they take all that in?
Yeah.
Do they think it's pure good? So I do think one of the reasons why the apocalypse and the dystopia is appealing to both young people and adults, because there are different reasons why it's appealing to adults. And that's been said all over the place about how we maybe see aspects of that in our current society. But I do think for a young person, it's a metaphor for your own emergence. And I know I rambled lengthily about that. So
No. Well, by the same token, I think it's the same kind of thing with superpowers and magical powers.
Yes.
Is that you've got everyone wants to be special, and everyone who's a kid wants to be unique and have the ability to defeat the enemies of their lives, which could be anything from a school bully to a math test to just getting the heck out of their high school.
Yes.
And when they picture themselves with superpowers, and I'm a big superpower fan, I've liked basically all of our superpower books, pretty much all of them.
Yes.
And even the ones I didn't like, there were still parts of it I liked because I like superpowers and magical powers. And I know that as a kid, I definitely pictured myself having a magical abilities and yeah, it's just fun. It's just what a kid does. So of course, putting that into a book is so smart for young adult because they get to live that out. They get to live their special ability and certain things that you throw in there. Look at Divergent and Maze Runner and Cinder and Legend. All of these dystopia books have an element of person with incredible abilities who even Blood Red Road, a person with incredible abilities who can kind of change their fate. And that's what I think it is. They can change their fate, and teens want to be able to change their fate because they feel like they don't have control, and something that allows them to do that is superpowers and magical powers. So that is definitely something that tends to be a great premise for a young adult book because it plays right into that aspect of a teen and an adult psyche.
Definitely. And I think as an adult, you have to be not too cynical because it's really easy as you grow up and the more years you spend on the planet and you think, you know what, those superpowers still haven't arrived. What went wrong? And so I think one of the attractions of a young adult novel is that, we can read it identifying with the teenager within, if you like. And so one of the reasons why if you set an adult book, say a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old who suddenly gets superpowers, it's not as believable because you think, what took so long? This is supposed to. It's a whole part of that whole coming of age and maturity, maybe puberty as well. The whole thing that we understand that there are rituals. There's a rite of passage, and so if you include rite of passage with the development of powers, whether they be fighting prowess, such as Saba in Blood Red Road, or Triss in Divergent.
Triss's divergent powers in Divergent.
Well, there you go. But she also turns out to be a pretty mean. What's it? Dauntless. She turns out to be a pretty mean Dauntless member as well. So admittedly, it's a big leap to that from her demure past, but still, this is the imagination of the teen. I can break free of my mold, two superpowers and magical powers are one way you can just leap completely free of your mold, isn't it? You just and God knows how long I stared at objects on a desk trying to move them with my mind.
Yep. Oh yeah, been there. Been there, done that.
Talk about fighting though, Brian, because you're the one, you love the training montage.
I love the fighting. I love the
fighting anyway. Full stop.
I like battles. I like feats of strength. I like that kind of stuff, and I think it really fits well in action is so important, and 90% of the books we've read have action. Even some of the personal relationship books, Scorpio Races has action.
Yes.
Delirium obviously has action, and even in its own way, like Paper Towns and Fault in Our Stars have some action. Not really fighting, but you have things happening. You have a crazy road trip, or you have egging somebody's car. Yes. You have things happening, things exploding and things spinning and all this stuff. Action is just so key, because if you, as a writer, if you get into that bogged down middle third of a book and nothing really happens, you get in trouble. So you need that kind of middle of the story, big climax, like the mini climax, something that happens. I just remember a video game from my youth, Final Fantasy III. About halfway through, you're with all these characters, and in those are RPGs, role-playing games. You're with all these characters. You're like, oh, I'm doing great. I'm making progress in here. And this will be a spoiler alert for a 20-year-old game, but all of a sudden, some big, crazy apocalypse happens, and you end up with just one character who's just been washed ashore of this island. Wow. Everything you gained over the course of that whole half of the video game is wiped out. Now that is one hell of a middle of a book.
Yeah.
That's a midpoint climax. And that makes that game classic. That is a classic game. And when books do the same, I'm trying to think of the best example. What was it? Scorpio Races that had a really good one. I'm trying to remember. Steelheart had something. When you get something really in the middle, I think Grasshopper Jungle maybe had a little bit of this. Something in the middle that just like shakes you. That is just such a key to these. And you can do that with action, but you can also, and we can transition this into kind of, these are related, the personal and intense relationships and the illness, desperation, depression.
Yes.
A lot of these have some good midpoints, and you don't have to just do it with action. You can do it with personal, like that's the external stuff. This is really the internal. Why don't, Robert, you go into some of these internal struggles that these illness/intense relationships
Sure, absolutely. And just to finish up on the fighting stuff as well. I mean, we've also had the sort of combination of that with the Deadly Assassin thing. So you've got this sort of this spillover of superpowers in there, and then somebody who is using their superpowers maybe for something they don't necessarily feel great about. They have to go out and kill people, so I think if you want to read books that are great for fighting prowess, then Graceling, Throne of Grass.
Throne of Grass. Throne of Grass.
That's the vegan.
We got
the vegan alternative. That's right. Yeah. Phoenix Island is a classic because of the whole boxing thing, and for me, the best example of arena battles combined with fighting prowess has got to be Red Rising. That was one exhausting book to read. But if you can stir in with that, the whole personal, intense relationship, and sometimes they do that, the authors do that with a setting of illness or depression or, even quite heavy themes such as suicide. We've got All the Bright Places. We've got cancer with The Fault in Our Stars. We've got the repetitive death with Before I Fall. We've got the intense coma after a tragic accident with If I Stay. We've got the suicide in 13 Reasons Why. I mean, these are some pretty intense themes in there. Yeah. But I think what they avoid is dwelling on the teen angst. And to come back to what you're saying, it's driven by action. It's driven by understanding, well, how has that played out? What happens next? I need to find out, not just I need to spend time in their head realizing how depressed they are. We need to find out what unfolds. So it's nothing without a story behind it. But sometimes those personal and intense relationships, so you don't need your sci-fi, you don't need your dystopia, you don't need your apocalypse, you don't need what they call high concept, a really kind of original idea. There's, what's original about a teenager contemplating suicide? Nothing.
Yeah. Nothing.
But it's been turned into some mega hits. So
Yeah.
obviously they all have their premise behind it, and I think if you're a writer, you've got to think about that in terms of working backwards. So whether you're a pantser or whether you're a plotter, if you're going to write something which is about a personal relationship or some kind of illness or some kind of personal desperation, you've got to start with the end in mind. How does the story end? What am I writing to? Because otherwise you end up with this giant saggy middle or even entire saggy book, because all you do is perpetuate this teen angst dialogue and relationships, and that's just painful. No one wants to read that. So
it needs to be heightened. It needs to be done in its own way. The originality really is big, and if you focus too much on trying to make it feel angsty, and I think the books we've liked the least have a very, very angsty main character.
Exactly.
Those are just frustrating for everybody. Yeah. Nobody likes them.
I mean, we can have annoying characters, as you said. In
Before I Fall,
perfect example of that. There's plenty of annoying characters that you come to like, and there's that whole save the cat moment. If they do something early on in the book that makes you appeal to them, in one way, or not you appeal to them appeal to you. That'd be nice to appeal to them. So, but also I think having really clever protagonists.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think having, and obviously John Green does that well, and All the Bright Places does that really well. I think that helps, especially on those hard to swallow books when you've got really smart people that just aren't your run-of-the-mill teen. I want to touch on one of the most important lessons we've learned, and it ties into your unusual settings heading. Transport you to another place.
Yeah, definitely.
We've talked about that. I read a book once called Writing the Blockbuster Novel, and that's one of the big things it always talked about was transporting to another place, setting it in a different world. If you're a spy thriller, you're going to want to go to Europe, or you're going to want to go to Asia or something, because you need to that's one of the reasons why the Da Vinci Code was such a success. It really transported you around.
Yes.
And we'll tie back into another reason why the Da Vinci Code was a success in a second. But books that you put down here, obviously Red Rising, you're literally traveling on a planet. Ready Player One, inside the Oasis, Night Circus, this weird circus that defies the laws of physics and everything. Grasshopper Jungle, Steelheart turns a well-known city into a completely unusual place, which shows you can take a regular place and make it something special. And compare Steelheart Chicago to Divergence Chicago, and Steelheart Chicago just resonates so much more because it's really been turned into its own place. I mean, it's literally a place covered in steel everywhere. You see it, and you see actual landmarks, and it's not just kind of floating. You don't want to be floating. You want, if your setting is important, you want to make it really something interesting that people can latch onto.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. There's I can't remember the name of the author of the book, and I will put it in the show notes, where he talks about this idea that as a reader, you want something that you can come back to every time in the book that's your kind of constant base. And sometimes that's the setting, sometimes it's the character, sometimes it's a place. So, maybe they always go back to the mastermind, the Batcave, or maybe it's their home, or maybe it's the band of misfits traveling together when they reunite. And it makes you feel good about, okay, I know where I'm at in the book now. And I think you're right, with Steelheart, you kind of get that. You're going to get the sense of, okay, I'm in this weird converted Chicago, but I know what it is and I'm familiar with it, and so when I'm racing down a steel tunnel, I know what that is. Whereas in Divergent, it was poorly done, really, because half the time I think, why these trains, they keep hopping on, I don't understand. Tell me why. Explain the trains, for goodness sake. And it never gets explained in the entire trilogy. So,
Yeah.
you think, I don't understand why that was like that in the setting. Whereas Steelheart, it's done and dusted right at the start. You find out about it, and then it's used and well described and part of the character of the book, dependable character of the book. So that's a good point there.
Last thing a YA book needs, we've gone over it over and over again, and we've learned this over the course, and that is a mystery.
Yes,
you need a mystery. Some of the best books we've read have had really interesting mysteries behind them. Red Rising had its mysteries. All the Bright Places had its mysteries. We all sorts of stuff. Every book that I can look down here at and see, like, did this have something that really kept us going? Like Poison Princess, Maze Runner, Cinder, Delirium, like all the books that we really enjoyed. Paper Towns had some kind of mystery, and that was the thing that got us through the middle. If there wasn't a big climax in the middle, a big midpoint, the mystery pulled us through. The mystery pulled us through the end.
Yes.
And I read a statistic recently, reported on it on Sell More Books Show, that when people give up on a book, it's usually in the first 10 to 40%. So
right.
If you can get the mystery and pull them through to the midpoint, and then you have an awesome midpoint, and then you just ratchet everything up and speed towards the end, people will finish that book.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest lesson I learned over the course of these 50 books that we've read.
Yeah, and I like to boil that down to one really simple phrase, which is, do I want to know what happens next?
Mm-hmm.
And if, as a reader, you're getting that with every page, last night, for example, I was reading a book that's in our queue, and I thought, I've got to get up early and record the split, so I don't know, I might read up till midnight or something, because this is really good. And I'd gone to bed about 10, right? So I'd been reading for a good couple of hours and really enjoying it. So, I'm feeling a bit tired now. I probably better put it down. I wasn't even falling asleep with the book. I could have gone on. So I looked at the time just before I put the iPad down, and it was 10 to 1.
Oh, wow.
Okay. But it's because I kept wanting to know what happens next. What happens next?
Yeah.
What happens next? And there's some really good aspects to this particular book where you just don't know, it's not unbelievable or silly suddenness, but there's some really interesting twists and turns that, aren't your normal. So I'm enjoying that. And I do think one thing to really avoid as well is this, that when we want to know what happens next, because there's conflict, because there's something in the way. You think, how are they going to overcome this? How is is Austin going to work out his three-way love triangle at the same time as battling giant praying mantises that devour entire human beings? How is David of David and Goliath in the David and Goliath Steelheart story? How is David going to take on Steelheart? What's his secret weapon? We know he's got some classic sort of things, but he's almost everything he tries. He sounds really smart. I mean, this is what people have said about Sanderson's writing. That he's got it figured out in his head. Okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and that's a great plan. That is really smart. Yeah, I didn't even realize that you could probably do that. That's a great way to take on that antagonist, and he does it, and it doesn't work. Rats! And so you think, what happens next? So I think it's not just the what happens next from a point of view of there's something going to happen. It's the what happens next because there's been conflict, and if you then make that conflict specific to the type of conflict that's either a metaphor for teenage life or it's specifically about the realities of teenagedom, then I think that makes for a great young adult book. You don't just pit kids together in an arena because it's what the dystopian government does. You do it because they have to keep proving themselves to get food, or you do it because they need the elite to rise through because they need new commanders for their army, such as in Red Rising. Or you've got simple conflicts such as Evie and Jack in Poison Princess, where they're thrown together He's the typical bad boy biker, and she's someone with maybe some mental problems, she thinks, which turn out to be emergent
magical powers.
Right. So we're now stirring in several of those things that came in from before, and you can start to see, okay, now I get why there are multiple elements of this book to get, but there's still conflict. Every page, conflict. And if you don't have that, there's no book.
Yep, I agree. Do I want to read more? Great way to boil that down.
Yes.
All right. 3 books you like the best, but then 3 books that we had trouble with and what we can learn from them. We have 3 minutes. Go.
You're determined to keep. We're going to have to do a part 2 of this episode.
You might have to.
So 3 books we like the best, or I like the best.
Yep. I'll do mine too.
Mine's probably really obvious because I keep referring to it as one of my favorite examples. But I'll leave that and go in reverse order. Number 3 was really hard because I had runners-up. I had 13 Reasons Why. I had The Fault in Our Stars. I had Beautiful Creatures, Poison Princess, Grasshopper Jungle, Legend, Anna Dressed in Blood, Steelheart, Blood Red Road, Before I Fall, Ready Player One. I mean, you forget we reviewed these almost a year ago. You think,
I know.
Yeah, of course, Ready Player One. And throw that all together as a library and give it to a teenager and say, here, bury your head in this for a couple of months.
Yeah.
Oh, they're just going to have a great journey. But I ended up going with number 3, All the Bright Things, from Jennifer Niven, because it's such a clever story. It's so sad, but it's also powerful. And the 2 different characters are beautifully written, and they are really different. And you don't know what's going to happen. And then when it does happen, it kind of takes your breath away. And to me, it even transcended The Fault in Our Stars, which I do think is a lovely story.
Yeah, think you meant All the Bright Places.
Oh, what did I say? Did I say All the Bright Things?
All the Bright Things. Yeah, that's what you had written.
I'm just so excited.
You were so excited by it, and it is a really good book.
All the
It
Bright
is a really
Places,
good book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's my number 3.
Yep.
Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver.
Yeah.
This one, it just messed with me.
Yeah.
It messed with me. It got in deep.
Yeah.
And I think All the Bright Places I really liked, but Before I Fall hit me so hard and deep, and I love those Back to the Future-esque change your future kind of things. That hit me hard. The ending was superb and shook me. So yeah, that's got to be in the okay. My teenager or myself, I don't like sci-fi fantasy. What can I read that's still really engaging? Before I Fall.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It was so close. It was really good.
Yeah.
And look, if I could be, if we could have a workshop with Lauren Oliver and Jennifer Niven about writing for the teenage girl coming of age, we'd sell that over and over.
Yeah, we would. What's your number 2?
My number 2 is I'm sorry, Maggie, because you got beaten into number 2, and you shouldn't have been, because The Scorpio Races was my number 2, and I loved for me, this is the epitome of fantastic dialogue. I loved the dialogue misdirection. I loved the mysterious nature of the Isle of Thisbe. I liked the fact that it was part fantasy. I like that you didn't really know what was going to happen, and it was kind of dark, but it was also a love story. It is so close to being my number 1, and my number 1 is only my number 1 because I happen to particularly like the genre, and so maybe if you caught me on a day where I just finished The Scorpio Races, I would have said this beats everything, pants down.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one, but if you haven't read it, I know that some of our listeners have already been in touch and said, I've now read it. It is fantastic, and not everybody likes it. It's doesn't get some good reviews in some places, and I don't understand that. But what's your number 2, Brian?
My number 2 is Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
So fun. I mean, there's probably better books I could have put there, but I just had so much fun, and it was set in Chicago, and it was the best superhero one we've read. And as a guy who writes superhero fiction, I just had to put it. So Brandon Sanderson, and I keep hearing that we need to read his other stuff. So everyone keeps telling me.
I'll stick it in the queue. Yeah, it's
Yeah, we gotta stick to
we've just got to stick to the YA thing. So I'll find one of them that we
Yeah,
can do.
and
That's
so we're about to be really anticlimactic. Our number one is the same book.
and why is that though? I mean,
Why is Red Rising our number one book by Pierce Brown? Because it was just so good. It was just so tight. It was so well written.
yes,
But it also had all the other elements of a good young adult book that we have really come to know. It had mystery. It had the everyman overcoming great odds, but also coming of age at the same time. It transported us to another place. It had a compelling main character, but also compelling other characters. It had twists and turns that we didn't see coming. It had awesome fight scenes. That's why it was our number one.
Romanesque and Greek political intrigue, snarky characters, misdirection in the dialogue. Yeah, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. It is a little bit on the alpha male side, perhaps. So you compare that to Before I Fall or The Bright Places, which is probably more appealing to the teenage girls. So maybe the reasons why we put it at number one would be the reasons why somebody who's a teenage girl wouldn't put it number one.
Sure.
However, I'm so looking forward to seeing this as a movie.
Yeah. Oh, me too. So we have like negative 2 minutes left. I want to go over the three books. We picked the same ones. Basically, you also have the selection in books you didn't like, but I'm going to meld the Prince and the selection together since they're the same author. I'm going to say what these books were lacking that maybe we can learn from. Then you can add in, and then I got to go. So Shatter Me. We need a protagonist with consistency, redeeming traits, and some likability. So I think that is something that was missing. The Prince. I'm just going to specifically say The Prince. A story needs purpose. It can't just skirt around the edges of another tale. There needs to be a conflict. There needs to be something new readers can sink their teeth into. And Never Let Me Go. Bring readers closer. Don't push them away.
Yeah.
Pace for younger readers. Give your main character something to do that doesn't require a romantic entanglement or some other relationship that they're just looking at from afar. You need to know what their deal is. You need to care about the main character. And that's very important.
That's well said. I wouldn't really add anything to that, actually. You could go on and on about why books don't make it, and look, the majority of them don't. They don't get past agents, or they get self-published, and they dwindle into obscurity because the stories are not good. But these happen to be popular books that actually there are other people who do like them, but I still think there's something to learn from them. And clearly, if you deconstruct them, there are elements in them that appeal to some of the things we've just touched on during the show that make a YA book appealing to the younger audience. But could they have been made better? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Even a bestseller can do better. So obviously, your self-published book can make improvements, and hopefully, this helps with this. Robert, it's been a good year. I'm sad I'm going to have to take a month off, but we've learned a lot together, and I can't wait to come back in November or so with some fired up desire to read things.
You'll miss it.
Yeah.
You will miss it.
Yeah, I will miss it. So
do you want to hear my Counting by Sevens quick review, or have you got to fly?
I've got to fly. Why don't you keep recording and do the outro?
Oh, no, I'll do it. That's fine.
You can record it later.
I'll record it later. But, stitch it on. That's all right. No problem.
Stitch it on. This has been awesome. It really is so cool to do this show. We get a lot of love from people who really enjoy what we're doing with this. So hopefully you liked our jam-packed year in review. Robert, this is great.
This has been fantastic, and may it continue. And look, if you've been listening and you've been with us right from the start, you've heard every episode, do drop by and let us know what you've loved, what you think we can do better, what you'd like to see coming up. if there's any special episodes that you'd like to have, say an episode where we feature solely on characters, or an episode that's solely on setting, or something out of the blue, or any other bonuses, or even a particular program that you'd love to see us put together and help you out, whether you're a reader or a writer, we'd love to hear from you. So that's podcast at thesplitbookreviews.com. You can always email us. Or you can
go to our website.
Go to the website. You can tweet us at The Split Book. We are not on Facebook because, it's not young adult.
It's not young adult.
But we're not on Instagram either. So.
We need to be on Instagram. We really need to work on that. Cool. Well, for Robert Scanlon,
yep.
I'm Brian Cohen. This has been a great year. Can't wait to do another year of reading awesome books with you guys. Thank you kindly. And Robert, if you please, your snarky end of the episode remark.
My snarky end of the episode remark is just watch out for bad young adult books, because they're going to mess with your mind. And stay tuned, by the way, for a bonus review. I'm going to review Counting by Sevens by Holly Goldberg Sloan. If you loved Rain Rain or other books about a unusual and eccentric protagonist, somebody who's either a genius or autistic who brings a lot of flavour to a story, it's a quick read, it's a beautiful book, and I'd love to give that to you as a bonus review. So stay tuned. But for now, from Brian and I, it's a goodbye, and I'll be right back in the next few seconds.
Snarky remark.
Hey everybody, it's just me. We've lost Brian. He's had to go and have dinner, and I'm going to leave you with a bonus review of the book Counting by Sevens by Holly Goldberg Sloan. If you loved Rain Rain, if you like those kind of quirky with young protagonists who has something very different to the sort of general way of perceiving the world, then you'd really want to get into Counting by Sevens. I discovered this by chance, happened to be recommended in my Facebook feed from a fellow, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators member. And this is the book description. This is straight from Amazon. So Willow Chance is a 12-year-old genius obsessed with nature and diagnosing medical conditions who finds it comforting to count by sevens. It has never been easy for her to connect with anyone other than her adoptive parents, but that hasn't kept her from leading a quietly happy life until now. Suddenly, Willow's world is tragically changed when her parents both die in a car crash, leaving her alone in a baffling world. The triumph of this book is that it is not a tragedy. This extraordinarily odd but extraordinarily endearing girl manages to push through her grief. Her journey to find a fascinatingly diverse and fully believable surrogate family is a joy and a revelation to read, and I would agree. Counting by Sevens is by Holly Goldberg Sloan. So from a reader's perspective, I think this is a beautifully written, really heartwarming story. As I said before, if you like Rain Rain, you definitely would like this book for sure. I really loved Willow's obsessions with numbers. Everything's in sevens, hence the title. She tries to divide everything up into sevens. And her precision zooming in on the things about our fellow human beings that maybe no one else really likes to do, or, feels that it's a little bit taboo. But she's more than happy because she's quite detached from her emotions. She'll peer into people and then kind of look at them and think, the flecks in that man's eyes, that means he has some kind of liver issue. But she's much more detailed than the way I'm telling it now. She's also a great narrator. I think this whole idea of being a detached, completely logical view of the world means that you start to look at these ridiculous reasons why human beings do what they do, but in all of their detailed pieces. Why does that jigsaw make any sense to anyone? I have no idea. But Willow manages to take it apart and lead us down this path of logic as to why people do what they do. And she's completely matter of fact. Even when it comes to the tragic incident, which I'll talk about shortly. Plus also, she's really, really well informed. I mean, this is a girl who's probably read the entire encyclopedia, when we used to have encyclopedias before Wikipedia, several times over. So, she doesn't make mistakes. She knows her stuff. You could probably ask her a trivia question about almost anything and she'll get it. But she's 12. So, she is a typical 12-year-old genius with that detachment from the world. And you like Willow right from the get-go. You really like her. There is an inciting incident, and then we go into a backstory, but it's actually really well done. So you enjoy reading about how Willow got to where she is now. The inciting incident, it's not a spoiler, it's in the book description as I've just read out. Both of her parents are killed in a really tragic road accident, and the way she finds out about them does obviously spark some emotion in there, and she has to find her way in a new life that makes sense to her. But it confuses the adults around her. Why is this girl approaching things in this particular way? Particularly Dell, her school counselor, he has a beautiful redemption arc in this book. And so if you want to read a book where your secondary characters also have arcs, and there's plenty of them for almost all of the secondary characters in this book, purely by the fact that they are around Willow. So it's very believable. And if you like those intimate stories that are not grand settings, there's no sci-fi, there's no dystopia, there's no apocalyptic element in this other than one girl's unusual worldview and then some terrible incidents, and then having to make her way in amongst the lower classes who don't have much to go around other than their own generous hearts. From a writer's perspective, as I've said before, I think the side characters are all absolutely brilliant, as is the mishmash of cultures. You've got the lazy counsellor with the redemption arc, you've got the Vietnamese family who kind of adopt Willow, and so some of the interchanges, especially the dialogue interchanges, underscored by Willow's thought processes, which are really hilarious, and so what could just be a tragic and sad or depressing story about a girl who's kind of a special needs girl but is really abandoned by society, it actually becomes uplifting and spiritual because of her, and sometimes because of her unwitting influence on those around her. And to be able to write that as an author, I think is very, very clever. There are separate points of view. So we do get Willow, we do get Dell's point of view, we do get Mai's point of view, and they're always very different voices. And that's particularly important here, of course, because Willow has a unique worldview. And you see, because of her very insightful and she has this precision about how she deconstructs everything, she just gets why people are doing what they're doing and doesn't attach anything to it. And then we transit to the point of view of Dell, her lazy school counsellor, who's got such selfish interests, and we see the world through him. And it's a lovely shift. It's a little jarring sometimes because you kind of want to be with Willow and you always enjoy going back to Willow, but we do really get that there's a different voice in each of these characters. And again, from a writer's point of view, that's a masterful thing to do and very, very hard to achieve, particularly when Willow has to be so different. So, some takeaways. It's a short read, but there's a lot to learn about sparse writing and how you develop a story over these sparse writing techniques. And the interplay between the characters is really wonderful. I just love the way that Willow is able to persuade people to do things for her, and they kind of end up being boxed into a corner, and they don't really think, how did this 12-year-old girl get me doing this? I really don't know. And masterful. Second takeaway, it's a relationship and a family dynamic story. So as I said before, there's no grand dystopian, there's no angsty teen bad boy romance. It's a very pure book. It's a pure story about a young girl making her way in a world that wasn't built for her. And there's an awful lot to learn as a person from a story like that. And my final takeaway is I think adult readers particularly would also appreciate the book and the underlying elements, as I've hinted at, what it really means to be human. Why do we end up treating each other the way that we do? And what is it about Willow's ability to see the world from a different perspective that somehow pulls everybody together and gets them all working together in situations where they simply would never have done it unless she'd been in the picture? So, beautiful story. Highly recommended, 5 stars, and a lot to learn from both a reader and a writer, and perhaps from a human perspective. The prompt. Your protagonist suddenly finds herself alone in a strange world and must befriend the most unlikely companions if she is to survive. What qualities does she unknowingly possess that others are attracted to? How does she stop those who would profit from her abilities from taking advantage of her? Feel free to write your response to the prompt in the show comments, or send us an email at podcast@thesplitbookreviews.com. You can tweet us at thesplitbook. You can leave a review on iTunes. If you haven't done so already, we would love that. It is our bread and butter. And of course, we'd love to hear from you if you have suggestions about books that you love. If you love Counting by Sevens and have read it, by all means, drop me a line. If you have other books that you think are similar, that you think we should be reading, let us know. What can we do better? What can we include for you in the next show? It's been a pleasure being with you for this entire year, and we look forward to seeing you next week with some guest co-hosts. Stay tuned. I'm Robert Scanlon from the Dreamer Chronicles, and that was Brian Cohen from Ted Saves the World, book Best Page Forward. He is the man, and he will be back, I assure you. Bye for now.
Thank you guys for watching. Somewhere on this page is a subscribe button to the Split channel. We do reviews every week. We would love it if you followed us every single week. Isn't that right, Robert?
That's exactly right. Follow us now. Hit the subscribe button.
Do it.